Hello, everyone. This is False Mind Reads here today, and I am here to bring you a tier ranking of everything I read in 2024. Now, I am about 200 pages away from finishing Orb Scepter Throne, but if I'm being realistic, I don't think I'm going to finish it before the end of the year, so it's not going to be on this list. But it's kind of a tragedy that it's not. So I'll try and put these series kind of in order. At least like the series. I should have done this before I got started, honestly. But you know what? You learn to live, and then you live to learn. Cool. Okay. So I'll do The Witcher first. The Witcher happened at the very start of the year, and that means that I have a very meh memory of it. I do remember how I felt about the books, so this is more based off of how I felt. Some of these books I have genuine criticisms for, other ones just really rubbed me the wrong way. So the tiers are all love. These are for books that I have maybe one or two notes, like I wish it would do this, but these are the books that have only heightened in my mind after I read them. 90% Love is those books that haven't heightened in my mind, but I still love them as much as I did when I first read them. 70% Love, this is based kind of off a grading system, these middle tiers, is like, yes, this is a pass. This is a good book that I would say other people would read if the premise sounds interesting. I have notes though. Like I do have some notes, but overall, you know what? The good outweighs the bad, and I would say I enjoyed myself. And I have notes is for those books where maybe they're not bad books, but I definitely had my nitpicks and problems with them, and you know sometimes you just have those books. So I think that Blood of Elves is definitely going to go in 70% love because, well, I do have a few nitpicks about the pacing of the book. I think that everything else really works. The characters, like Geralt's journey, like just starts off in this book. But besides a little bit of the pacing issues, you still get him doing some Witcher stuff, and like it's still a little bit of those vestiges of the short stories from before this novel series. And then I think it's Time of Contempt that's next. And okay, wait, I gotta think. Time of Contempt is when the wizard meeting happens. I'm gonna have to put it above 70. So like this would really be 80% love, but I don't want to really water down the tiers that much. You know what I mean? 70% love is minimum 70%. But like this is not definitely like Time of Contempt is definitely not 90%. But this book is way better than Blood of Elves. Like in its pacing, that was the main thing with Blood of Elves is its pacing is a little bit weird and a little bit disjointed. It really feels like two separate like short stories that were kind of mended together, or not short stories, but like it feels like a fix up almost. And then Time of Contempt is really the first one where it just feels like one grand narrative, and it's a really powerful narrative. And from what so like I listened to these back to back on audiobook, except for Season of Storms, Storm of Swords. No, that's not what it's called. And so Baptism of Fire, I would put right under Time of Contempt because Time of Contempt's main sequence is legendary in my opinion. Tower of Swallows is going to go to 90% love because that's where I had like that is the one with the ice skating. It is just the most like Ciri focused book from my memory at least besides Lady of the Lake. But it just Ciri is my favorite character in that series. She is just amazing. I love her so much. And yeah, I think that Tower of Swallows is her best book. Like, you know, if you've read it, you get what I mean. The ice skating scene, just amazing. And then Lady of the Lake is going to go to bottom of 70%. Now, this Lady of the Lake, if it had gone on any longer, I would say it's in I Have Notes. Because the pacing in this is like significantly longer than any of the other books. And it feels that way. He just adds so much. And like it works if you come to it thinking, okay, this is a more of a literary experience. It does work in some ways, but I think it stumbles over itself more than it really succeeds. But the stuff in there to do with like Geralt and like the final resolution of the whole saga is worth it. It's just there's also a little bit of like tertiary elements that really don't. I don't know. If you've read the book, you know what I mean. Like there's some like interesting ideas, but it's not. Yeah. And then the first I Have Notes is going to go to Season of Storms. I think that Season of Storms has actually gotten better for me, and it's one of those things where I don't quite remember why I was so put off by this book. But don't get me wrong, I was put off by this book. This book was really frustrating when I was reading it. The only thing that I can remember is kind of the eugenics, the magical gene, like the magical eugenics, basically. That's what I remember from this book, and that is an amazing idea. This book feels so disjointed. It feels like even more disjointed than Blood of Elves, which is that story's main problem. I don't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be like a Witcher short story that is like lengthened out to full novel length, or does it want to be something like it's pulled in all these different directions, and for me it just was diminished. And I've held on to a few nuggets of intrigue from that novel, but not enough to save it. And Fireborn Blade, I'm going to have to put it in I Have Notes, because it is very short. And I will say, this is one of those books, this happens sometimes where you just put it down, and then you pick it back up, and you just kind of have to play catch up with yourself. It happens. It's just a part of reading, I think, for me personally. It happens sometimes, and this is one of those books. So did it suffer in my brain because of my own actions? Yes, but this is my channel. I'm the one reading it, and I have to say that honestly, the climax is the peak of this book, and it's not even that like amazing. There's a twist that's pretty cool, but it doesn't make up for the fact that like it really feels meandering for like 90% of the book. 10% is pretty strong. It's pretty strong narrative, like bait and switches, but it's just it's short, right? So I can't fault it. Like it didn't have that problem of being way too long. But yeah, no, I'm gonna read the second book if that gives you any indication. I am intrigued enough to continue on, but it just never lived up to what I wanted, what I thought it could live up to. Right? So Shadow of What Was Lost, this is a more recent read. I'm going to put this in right there. It is very plot focused. The characters are what I would consider to be weak. These are weak characters. It is a very plot focused. There is a major twist in this book that is always spoiled for people. So this is a no spoilers video, so I'm not going to spoil the twist. But trust me, read until about, I'd say like 50-60% of the way into this book before you really make your full judgment on it, because the twist makes it so much more interesting, but it's always spoiled. And if you know the twist, you're gonna go into the book waiting for the twist to happen, and the first 50% is going to be a slog because it's very standard, and I admit it's very standard, but the plot it really picks up around the midpoint. It starts to like feed you these little nuggets of here and there, and these just it's strong. And then we get into Malazan. We're gonna do Book of the Fallen first, and then I will do the two books in the novels of the Malazan Empire afterwards. So, like how I said, the Fireborn Blade kind of got disjointed. This Bone Hunters also got disjointed for me. I read the entirety of the Witcher saga in between starting and finishing the Bone Hunters, which was, I'd say, about 2 months, which, whatever. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things. But that being said, I'm gonna have to put it at 70% love. And this is one of those ones as well where, like, no, it's gonna have to go 90% love. But it's under Tower of Swallows, because I can admit fully that this book, the first half of this book, it's neatly cleaved in the middle, I think, between like the first half, which is a climax to the entirety of the Seven City Saga in this series, and then the latter, like the end of the book, the last half of the book is a kind of a climax to the whole Empire section of the novels. But I much enjoyed the front half more than the back half, and due to that, like, really, I think this would work better on a reread, but due to the fact that it's very top heavy for me, it kind of loses some points. And now here's where we start getting into pretty good. Reaper's Gale is going to go to all love for me, because since I read this book, I have my complaints. I think that this book, the journey that they go on, that a lot of the characters go on in this book, is a bit overlong. But I mean, his books are always overlong, and this one is only just by a little bit. I hear complaints when I watch videos about this book, or when I finished it. I heard complaints of like some of the climaxes were not as strong as people anticipated, and I can see where they're coming from, but they worked, right? I'm not someone who is sitting here going, oh, this is going to be so awesome when this happens, because it has to happen, because I'm the one reading it. I was just along for the ride, and where Erikson took me, I just felt like I belonged, right? And yeah, I got there, and there is one moment from this book at the very end with a character that not a lot of people seem to love as much as I did, but it's just such a powerful, poignant moment. It's so powerful that it sticks in my mind, and when I think of this series, my mind instantly goes back to this very book. This book is where I got Malazan. That moment, it stuck with me, and it made me feel compassion in a way that books have never really forced out of me. You know what I mean? This book, that moment, reached into me and tore out and exposed my own compassion to me. And for that, it'll be all love from me. Now, Toll the Hounds is up next. Spoiler alert, this might be the best book I read all year, right? There's only one book that can compete with it, right? But this is another one where I watched all the videos, and I had no notes on this. I had 0 notes on this. Everything worked for me. Every single part about this long-ass book. There was only about one section in the very middle of the book, in between things happening, like the climax, the midpoint climax, and then the like getting into the second act of the book, where things really kind of dragged for me. But that was only a very small portion compared to a lot of these books. You know what? A lot of these Malazan books are really long, and they have some parts that do kind of like, let's fast forward this. I don't want to know. I don't need to know about this. But this book had like maybe 50 pages of that, which is incredible writing. I think Erikson, this might be the best one. This might be the best one. If you said this was the best one, I would have no notes for you. I would say fair enough, right? I do think I like another one more. Dust of Dreams. I'm going to have to go with bottom of 90% love, because truthfully, like, Malazan books are just in a different league for me. You know what I mean? If you go and look at my my story graph, it will you'll see that, like, Toll the Hounds is a 5 out of 5, and then Dust of Dreams or Bone Hunters and Reaper's Gale are only 4.75 out of 5. That's because, again, I had problems with it, and the only reason that Reaper's Gale is up above, right, it reached that honorary 5-star. Like, I'd have to reread it to re-review it in my mind, but it's reached that honorary 5-star because of how it stuck with me. Dust of Dreams, I have had, this is the most problems I've had with a Malazan book, while also having kind of unique. I think that the Malazan aspects of this really didn't work when you think of like other books, but this went really hard. Everything with the snake plotline, masterful, masterful. Everything in, I think, to do with the Barghast, I was so bored. It almost reading slumped me. It almost put me into a reading slump. I almost put this down and picked up another book to try and save myself, but I powered through it. And that's why it's, I think, one of the lowest rated Malazan books that I gave out, because it's just, it's kind of brutal. There's like a good 300 pages where I was like, God, can we please fast forward this, man? We don't need to see this. We don't need to see this. This is thematic work. There's no plot being forwarded here. Please. Please. And will I say I came around to the experience in the end? I can't say I did, because that agony of like such boredom was so prominent, right? And I know that some people have felt that during like Reaper's Gale and Toll the Hounds, but this is where it hit me. This is where it hit me so bad, I almost put down a Malazan book for the first time since Bone Hunters, right? Like Bone Hunters wasn't boring. I was just burnt out from reading literally like 6 books back to back. 6 like nearly 1,000 page books, all of them, since at least the 4th one is like over 1,000 pages, and or like right about 1,000 pages. So for me to get burnt out almost in one book was like pretty damning, but that's all I'll say. And Crippled God, I'm gonna put it below Toll the Hounds, but that's because I have notes with Crippled God. But in overall enjoyment, like overall in catharsis, this is more cathartic than Toll the Hounds, right? This is a book where I have like nitpicks, but all I have is nitpicks. I don't have any serious structural flaws like I do for like Bone Hunters, Reaper's Gale, or right, Bone Hunters and Dust of Dreams, where I'm like the structure of the book didn't quite work for me. I just have little nitpicks about like the final battle, and just some of the stuff kind of got, how do I say this? Basically, it's hard for me to picture stuff. So when we start getting like a sword fight, I can kind of follow along close enough, right? But as we start getting into these massive, like basically like, okay, if there was a book about kaijus fighting and it was more than just throwing hands, I wouldn't be able to get it. And I'm not saying there's kaijus in this book, but I'm saying that like it felt like, you know, you had like a wave of power rolled over, and I'm like, okay, well, wave of power is very nebulous. So that's why I'm gonna have to put in this scenario, in this ranking, I'm gonna put Toll the Hounds above the Crippled God, just for that reason. Okay. Return of the Crimson Guard, I'm gonna put that at 70% love. You know what I mean? I can't. It's amazing. I'd say this is actually closer to an 80, but it doesn't quite reach the 90 range. It is basically Malazan. It is condensed, and with Erikson's Malazan books, you have less of a main character and more of a main, like it's a very it's a main cast. It's a what do you call that? It's I don't know. It is where not one main character, but like a main cast of characters. Whereas in Esselmont's books, you do have main characters and side character, like, you know what I mean? Instead of the whole platoon being it, you see it from one guy's perspective. You see the platoon from one guy's perspective, and you know what? It works. I think it works more than it doesn't work. Erikson, I think, just plays a lot more grander, and the fact that he's able to make it work kind of elevates it in my mind, right? I think that Dust of Dreams is still, like, the worst Malazan book, Dust of Dreams, is still better than the best novels, or Book of the Fallen is still better than novels, like, at least so far. But I've enjoyed more consistently I've enjoyed novels in the Last Empire. Every book I've read, even Orb Scepter Throne so far, I've enjoyed it more consistently than I have Book of the Fallen. But Book of the Fallen just, it reaches higher highs and less lows, right? It reaches those highs that are like transcendent, especially the Crippled God Told the Hounds, right? It's like those ones are just like, those are books that can change lives, right? Whereas Return of the Crimson Guard, and I'll also go ahead and just include Stonewielder in here, they are books that are like solid. No, I have again, more consistent, but yeah, for Name of the Wind, I'm gonna have to put it at the bottom of 70% love. And you know what? This is bordering. I'm being generous. Because I don't have something between the books that I have notes for and this, that's going there. Because I have only notes in my mind, right? I have to remember the fact that I mostly enjoyed Name of the Wind. Like, I mostly enjoyed it. I enjoyed everything, most things up until the end with the matter of love and how it is handled in this book. But that was a major thorn on my side. It destroyed my my enjoyment of the book going into the final act, and that is not how you want it to happen. It's just it really put me off Rothfuss in general. Like, I haven't even read the second book. My plan was Name of the Wind, something else, Wise Man's Fear, and that didn't happen because it just Name of the Wind took the wind right out of my sails. You know, he stole the wind from me. That's who he stole the wind from. The Name of the Wind takes my wind. Okay, but it's not as bad as the worst thing I read this year, which is Heretics of Dune. I think that if you were a true Dune scholar, there is stuff to like here. But this book, basically, Herbert finished all of his thoughts that started in the first book with the fourth book. I think that he handily concluded it. And he was starting new ideas up in Heretics of Dune. And a lot of them were clumsily handled, stuff to do with like gender and sex, and a lot of this stuff was clumsily handled. I think that a lot of the characters were kind of underwhelming. I can't remember a lot of the female characters, which this book does focus on female characters a lot, which is pretty bad. You know, and it doesn't help that a lot of them are Bene Gesserit, which are going to produce similar characters, right? Like, I think that I remember Miles Tegg and I remember the Gola much more than I remember, anything else. And I mean, I think the Honored Matres are pretty cool. I think it's good in concept, but when Herbert explores in this book those concepts, he really trips over himself. He has trouble finding his voice on these particular subjects. I don't think this lessens Frank Herbert's, like, I loved everything about the first four books. You know, I think Children of Dune was a bit weaker, but you know, I love those four books as a sequence of events, and as a new sequence, right? I'll group the first four together, and then I'll group the last three together. As you know, what I think that God Emperor perfectly bridges the gap. But as a follow up to God Emperor, it doesn't live up to it. And as a new beginning, if this was Dune 1, Dune would never have reached the heights. It is not. I don't think it's even in the same ballpark as Dune. This, like, yeah, it's by far the worst book I read, which, you know what? It is what it is. I think that Shadow of the Torturer is going to go, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll put it above, yeah. That seems like it just feels right. Because Shadow of the Torturer is a classic work of science fantasy. Far future, so far that our history has been all but forgotten. except for, you know, a few little Easter eggs here and there for us readers to uncover, right? But I thought this had a lot of pacing issues, even though it was a shorter novel. But it's one of those books that I feel like the pacing was only an issue to my sensibilities and not like a textual issue. I think that if you're rereading this series, it's going to be a lot richer. But it just, you know what? I acknowledge that sometimes you're going to be ignorant on your first read. You're going to have an ignorant opinion. And is this an ignorant opinion? Maybe. But you know what? It's my first read through. I'm going to have the opinions I have until I'm done. You know what I mean? I'm done with the books. So City of Towers coming up next. I'm going to place it at the top of I Have Notes. Because does this quite reach a 70%? No. I got to say that it has a passing grade. It has a 60% passing grade, right? There is a book that I'm reading right now called Darkwalker on Moonshade. It's the first Forgotten Realms novel published. And it is really illuminating the fact that City of Towers was better than I gave it credit for. City of Towers, it takes place in the Eberron campaign setting for Dungeons and Dragons. And that campaign setting does a lot of the heavy lifting, right? The City of Towers, the titular City of Towers, is a very interesting setting, and that setting carries a lot of the intrigue, along with basically Eberron is what makes this novel. It suffers in the character department mostly, but they're not as paper thin. Like, I'd say this book has better characters just by the standards of being D&D. Like, you know what I mean? Warforged and Halfling and, you know, all of these houses, these make them more interesting than like Shadow of What Was Lost. But I would say I like the plot of Shadow of What Was Lost more than City of Towers. But like, it barely escapes, or it barely doesn't escape. I have notes. Buddy Stories, I'm gonna place it at very bottom of 70% love. Right? It's just it fills in the gaps of part 1 of Chainsaw Man pretty well. It gives me more of these characters that I really love, but it doesn't do much more than that. It is a novelty at best. If you never read this, you wouldn't be losing anything from the series. It's strictly side content, right? There's like slice of life elements or like moments in the manga, and this is like slice of life of those slice of lives. But I think that it does in the end actually, you know, it elevates stuff. If you finish part 1 and read this, you're going to get more out of the story. That's it. Here, I'm going to have to take a drink. My voice is starting to give out right near the end. All right. Homeland by R.A. Salvatore. I'm going to put this in 90% love. This is one of those books that is like, just like City of Towers, I think it is heavily carried by its setting, but that's kind of being disingenuous, right? I'd say the setting also very much influences the characters and the journeys and the politics. Like, it is much more than I ever thought it would be. And it works. Like, Drizzt works. I love like hearing about his inner turmoil in this book, his family, all the politicking of Menzoberranzan. It is interesting and complex and dark. It has, you know, I'm using a lot of buzzwords, but it is kind of, I guess not simple, but like it feels more than like, this is my first, what I'd say, classic fantasy, right? And what's funny is it was published around the same time as The Witcher. Okay, it was published. Yeah, I'd say it's pretty classic, right? But like it's around the time of The Witcher. Okay, wait, I'm gonna have to search that up. Yep. Okay. Cool. I got it right. Witcher was the 1990s as well. So it's the time of The Witcher. Like, so I guess not my first classic fantasy, but it's what, like, this is like directly descended from the lineage of Tolkien. This is D&D. This is as Tolkienian as it gets for fantasy. But he really challenged, like, because there's this perception in the D&D community that older editions were very simplistic in their morality, and you were encouraged to kind of, like, it's the classic, well, is D&D racist because all the black people, like all the dark-skinned people, are evil? And for a long time I was like, duh, like, obviously everyone says it's true, so it must be. And then I read this book, and to see R.A. Salvatore approach it with much more nuance, right? Are they all evil? I mean, it depends on what you mean when you say evil. Like, in D&D, I think that there's a common approach, at least that I took, was evil is, I'm going to murder people. I'm going to kill to get what I want. And there are some people who are like that in this book. But this is more of a lawful evil society rather than a chaotic evil. And this book just really shaped what I wanted out of fantasy, right? It really took what I wanted, or D&D, sorry, not fantasy, D&D. It took what I wanted, and it presented me something that was similar, but also different enough to show me what the people who make D&D think of D&D, right? Because this was approved by Dungeons and Dragons. It's just a nice look into the place, the Forgotten Realms setting, and how it views evil. I liked it. And then we have Exile. Yep, it's going right there. It lost a lot of the incredible politicking and the nuanced morality, I'd say, and nuanced beyond just Drizzt. You know what I mean? Like, Drizzt is always going to have his internal struggles, but I found that they were less profound, as he didn't have, most of the book, he didn't have someone really to bounce off of, and having him be alone for as long as he was really a hindrance. We get less of the politicking, just as he is out of Menzoberranzan. And it just, overall, like, it just never lived up to the first book. And then we're going to have Sojourn right there. It's also a fall from grace. Like, it's a fall from what I wanted the series to live up to in the first book. They never get bad, they just get lesser. And as sad as that is to say, it's kind of how it is. It just, he goes out into the I was gonna say overworld. I guess you could call it an overworld. And there's like some Frankenstein references, and you got him like interacting with the locals. It just never it never caught up to its the potential of the first book for me. And I'm gonna read on in the Drizzt series. Of course, I'm gonna read on in all Forgotten Realms series. Hopefully, try at least all of them. And then we have China Mieville, City in the City. I had very high hopes for this one, and this was also one of those ones where I read the very beginning of the book, and I think it was the writing style, and I was in the middle of other books at the time. It just kind of put me off, and so I think I was reading Stonewielder. This was around the time I was reading Stonewielder. And so I finished Stonewielder, and then I went back and I read a bunch of the books. That was like Fireborn Blade, or what was that? I think City of Towers was in there, The City in the City. It has sparked a lot of creativity in me. I think that Mieville's talk about like cities and what they are, what they mean, is really interesting. I'm going to have to place this. Yeah. It's basically tied with Exile. It flips on any particular day. I'll put it below right now. But yeah, that is kind of my list. I think it's a pretty good list. I think that I had a pretty good reading year. There was only a few books, really one book that I hated, two books that I hated. One of those actually came up and, it saved itself. But I think I read some really good books. I think that the Witcher series is really fun and literary fantasy that takes its time and is slower and is more moody. And Malazan is just a treat. It is just a treat. As soon as you like understand it, right before you understand it, it's fun. It's slow, but it's epic. Its scale is massive. And then you get it, and it clicks, and it's all those things, and it's deeply emotional and moving, and one of the most emotionally affecting series I've ever read. And then you have Novels in the Malazan Empire, which is epic and grand in scope, while also being narrower. Like, it's still Malazan, and you actually explore a lot more of the world, like explore, right? Straight up explore a lot more of the world than you do in Book of the Fallen, but it never manages to reach the highs of the main series. And then you have like some of the stuff like Dark Elf trilogy. It's pretty good. The City and the City, like all these other books that are sitting in 70% love, they're all good books. I'd recommend everything. Basically, I'd recommend everything on this list, with the caveat of Heretics of Dune can be rough, but you should at least give it a try. You know what I mean? Get it as cheaply as you can. Go to a used bookstore. Get it on a e-reader. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Have a good one. Bye.